I'm Rachel Stevenson. I'm here with Avi, and I'm so excited. Avi is actually one of the first people who I've made friends with via Stack Overflow. So this is very exciting for me. Avi, could you introduce yourself to everybody? Since I think random Stack Overflow messages are probably not how the rest of the internet knows you.
That's true. It's true. I'm actually one of the moderators on the security Stack Exchange, the security side of Stack Overflow. I've been one of the community moderators since that site first was created over a dozen years ago. Honestly, it's not a lot of work nowadays. It's very self-serving, one of the more well-behaved Stack Exchanges, apparently. But other than that, I kind of wear two main hats, at least professionally. In my day job, I run a boutique consultancy called Balance of Security. We focus on product security, helping developer teams do what they do better and more securely. In my other hat, I am a longtime volunteer for OWASP, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit. Those of you not familiar with it, it's the Open Worldwide Application Security Project. Tons of free open source resources, tools, guides, OWASP.org. Go check it out if you're not familiar with it. I'm
Mhm.
also currently on the board of directors of OWASP. When somebody volunteers a lot, you wind up just telling them volunteer more.
Ain't that the truth? So I think a lot of developers or people in my circles generally, when we know about OWASP, we know about the OWASP top 10. What else should we know about what the organization does?
So the OWASP top 10 is an interesting thing because, as you say, everybody knows the OWASP top 10, but it's definitely the highest profile project we have,
Mhm.
but in some ways it's one of the least valuable ones.
Oh, interesting. Okay, say more.
Because yeah, because a lot of people treat it like a standard, we're compliant with the top 10, and a lot of vendors, security vendors and scanners will scan for the top 10. But
Mhm.
the top 10, immediately one of the first things it says, and multiple times throughout the top 10, this is not a standard. There is no compliance to be had here. It is simply 100% an awareness document. Basically, oh, security, what's that? Here's the top 10 type of common things. The OWASP is a worldwide community run by, I think, like half a dozen staff members, right? There's thousands of members, hundreds of companies involved in it, and it's a community dedicated to making software security more accessible. And what that means is we're trying to get developers to write more secure products. So we're trying to get QA engineers and test teams to have better tools to test for security.
Mhm.
DevOps, CISOs, everybody around that's involved in a software product, using it or whatever, there is something to be had there. As far as some interesting projects that
Mhm.
are accessible, some of my favorite ones are known as the ASVS, the Application Security Verification Standard. That one is a standard, and that's great. It's like a long set of generic security requirements. If you're building pretty much any kind of application, not just web, any kind of
Mhm.
software application, it's worth complying at least with level one, right? And then
Okay.
there's level two for more secure products. If you're building a cat blog, you want to be level one. You're building an online bank, go for level two, and then there's level three. And different categories, different topics, and a lot of specific, detailed security requirements that you could just plug into your project. The the parallel to that is the OWASP SAM, Software Assurance Maturity Model, which talks about not the product, but about the process. If you want you're building a big
Mhm.
thing and you want your teams to be working securely, there's a lot of great information there about how to get your team to be more mature with their application security process,
Mhm.
what activities they should be doing, and so on. For developers specifically, two of my favorite projects. Number one is the OWASP Juice Shop. This is basically the best place to never ever buy juice online. It's a broken web application built in modern technologies. It's Node.js and Angular, I think. So not super modern, but yeah, modern-ish technologies. There's a Docker container to run it. And what's special about it, other than, never actually getting the boxes of juice that you ordered, there's a bunch of vulnerabilities built into the site.
Okay.
Want to go and practice, what does SQL injection look like? What does cross-site scripting look like? What if how do I find all these security vulnerabilities? It's a great playground.
Okay, that's really cool.
Yeah. I do want to say one more because my absolute favorite OWASP project is the cheat sheets project. And
Okay.
if you go to cheatsheetseries.owasp.org, this is probably the one that is the most useful for developers because it's just a series of short, actionable, detailed action items that developers need to take for a specific topic. You're
Okay.
implementing Docker, here's 10 things. You're building a file upload mechanism. Here's 12 things you should be doing. Just
I like
detail
this.
this, and this in developer speak. No, security consultant fluff. Just do these things.
Very cool. So one of the things I'm curious about, OWASP has been around for a long time. You are established. So I'm curious, how have you seen security evolved over the history of the organization? Like, have the security concerns shifted as we've done shift left security? Has that started to shift conversation in meaningful ways? Just over the course of your involvement with OWASP, can you just give us broad brushstrokes of how you're seeing the community in and around security change?
Yeah, so I've been involved with OWASP since I think 2006 was the
Okay.
first time I started attending chapter meetups. And this is something important for everybody to know. There's hundreds of chapters all around the world. You can just go and attend a meeting. They're all free. Some of the conferences are not, but meetups are free to attend. You'll go and hear some great talks about whatever you're working on. Since I started being involved, it's definitely become more mainstream to talk
Mhm.
about application security, software security, product security, and all that stuff. Security used to be like, oh, we have a firewall, we're done here, right? And
Mhm.
now it's definitely become more mainstream to talk about these things. However, you mentioned the OS top 10. Since the very first top 10, SQL injection has been there, right? In
Mhm.
one form or another, right? An attacker can put in the wrong types of input, and this gets stuck into the query, go to the database, and so forth. Recently, OS came out with the top 10 for LLM applications
Right.
specifically, AI focus and all that stuff.
Mhm.
And you want to guess what number one was there?
I'm assuming it was prompt injection.
Yep, prompt injection. Basically, the thing I've been saying often is
Mhm.
everything old is new again. So on the
Yeah.
one hand, SQL injection hasn't gone away, and we're
Mhm.
just keep repeating the same mistakes.
Right.
And yes, prompt injection is still number one in this brand new technology that we just invented. And so where are we? It's been 25 years since we know about SQL injection. How has this not gone away? On the other hand, there are things that we made huge strides with. Basically, taking SQL injection again, it's very easy. Most frameworks will remove that. You know, we're an inventive folk, so we can always get around those things, but the platforms prevent that now out of the box. So you
Right.
have the tools there, and we just need to know to use them right.
Right. Do we have the tools there for LLMs, or is it different when we're trying to do like natural language versus queries?
Yeah.
It feels like a different problem, or it was same problem, but like different implementation of how we would have to attack it.
Yeah, I feel like the same patterns that brought us those old problems are being copied over and onto the new patterns, the new technologies. I don't think it's a solved issue yet
Right.
with LLM and whatnot. There are
Mhm.
plenty of startups out there that will offer you their solution of the week. Um, that's another pattern that we tend to have in our industry, isn't it?
It's people selling you services.
Yeah, there's always going to be a product for that, right?
Yes,
Lots of them.
that's fair. So the other thing I don't know if this is the right framing to ask, but like you kind of talked about like frameworks and things. And so like when I'm thinking about security frameworks, I think about like the Salsa framework that came out of Google versus like what you all have. And I think about the OpenSSF. Do you all have collaborative relationships with some of these? Are they things that people should be looking at as complements to one another, or if they're different teams should care about different things? How do you think about who does what?
So we definitely have some collaborations with some of the other organizations out there, some less so. You mentioned the OpenSSF. So one really interesting difference between the OpenSSF and OWASP is that OWASP is very grassroots. It's
Okay.
driven by practitioners, by experts, by individuals who want to dedicate time and effort to solve a specific problem.
Mhm.
Of course, we have a lot of corporate supporters and a lot of companies will spend their employees' time working on that, but it comes from the individuals. In fact, OWASP members are 100% individuals. There's no such thing as a company being a member.
Okay.
Unlike OpenSSF, which is driven by corporate interests, which is
Mhm.
not a bad thing, right? I mean, that's how you drive change by investing money. That's where the
Mhm.
money comes from. But it's a slightly different focus, and it's solving for the problems that the individuals have doing a thing
Mhm.
versus what the industry want, what companies in the industry want.
Gotcha. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that as just a point of how to think about both of those different organizations. That's very helpful. So my other question then is you talk about grassroots, you talk about developers, and so now we need to talk about the quote I perpetually steal from you. And I try to give you credit every time I use it, but I think
I
I've used it
appreciate that.
enough now that it starts to get credited to me, which is problematic. But I loved your line that you used, and this is actually how I first found you on the internet, was security at the expense of, or like, security at the expense of developer experience comes at the expense of security. And I think that's a fabulous line. And so I want to talk about like getting developers excited and interested in security. Like, what is your process there? How have you approached this over your career? How have you started to think about this?
So one note first is that the original version of this was security at the expense of usability.
Usability. Okay. I like
It's
that
just
too.
it still applies, and to some extent, the developer experience is are the users of some parts of the security, right? We want to have paved roads to security so that the default easy way of doing a thing for developers is going to be the secure, correct way to do it
Mhm.
versus having to fight against my application framework to do something securely, to have to
Mhm.
fight against my database to do it securely. But the same idea is still there, and it's for me, it's very much a psychological thing. You need to take into account the human that is doing a thing, right?
Mhm.
Humans are crafty. If you make it hard to do something, they'll figure out how to do it easier. You put up guardrails, they're going to get around the guardrails if they don't want those things.
Right.
And the same thing goes to for developer experience. If the default way is going to be the secure way, but if you really know what you're doing, you can, turn that off and turn off the guardrails and do what you need, still give them the power to make those decisions, but not have to think about the security, not have to spend an inordinate amount of time thinking, well, this is what I want to do, but what's the right way to do it, or is the other way to do it? There's still a lot of work to do there, but at
Mhm.
least take that friction out of the way.
Yeah. So I'm curious because you talked about you want to have the paved roads, right thing be the easy thing. And you don't want to have guardrails that people just go around. Have you seen successful practices and how people, either in terms of good tools that people have used and the best place to start, in terms of actually finding what the right guardrails are, or like where do things need paving? Like, how do people approach that in a successful way?
So this is really a question around the platforms that we use,
Mhm.
right? The platforms and the default libraries and things like that. I'll give you an example. Encryption is always something that we developers always get wrong because it's so fiddly. There's so many little details, and you get one detail wrong, even if you're using an existing library, and you get it wrong by passing the wrong cipher mode, right? You pass ECB instead of CBC or GCM, things that most developers don't even need to care about what they are. And if the library doesn't tell you you have to do that, you won't. So a good example of that is later versions of PHP even. And I tend to pick on PHP as the bad boy of software security, but this is one thing they got right. There are built-in encrypt functions now that you do not need to fiddle with and call the specific details. You can if you really want to, but the default functions are there. You can call it encrypt. You don't have to think about all the different things. You need
Mhm.
to worry about the key, but that's about it, not about all the parameters. And this model, this kind of thinking, I'm seeing this a lot more. Python had those libraries built in. That was the way they were originally constructed. If you want to get into the underlying stuff, you can do that. And years ago, I taught Python to high school kids, and that was already there. I'm seeing this now, later versions of ASP.NET, for example, since Core has that model built in as well, has that pattern built in. You can just encrypt it and we'll take care of the details for you, which you can, configure with middleware and we'll deal with all that stuff.
Mhm.
That type of thing, right? That give us this simple default option, not make me have to do a doctorate in cryptography to be able to do something that as a programmer I need to be doing every day anyway.
Mhm. So part of it's going to come from programming languages and just kind of holistic ecosystem things. What about like security teams themselves? Are there things that they should be doing internal to their organization to help make things better?
So the big thing there for me is that I find a lot of security teams don't speak developer.
Mm.
They don't know code. And this goes back a fellow, I'm trying to remember his name. I remember this 2011. There was a security conference, and one of the speaker got up and said, talking to security people, right? Developers don't know anything about security. And I don't remember who it was. He stood up. This is going to bother me now because I quote him often, just blanking out his name. He stood up, you know what? You security people don't know anything about developers, don't know anything about development. And traditionally, a lot of the security teams come from things like corporate policies and network security. And if you've not written code, if you've not lived a day as a developer, you don't really understand how that happens. I still have clients that I run into is like, I'm going to set the policy. I'm going to decide developers are going to do this, this, and this. And I
Mhm.
want you to write that policy for me. I was like, okay, we'll talk to some developers and see how their workflow is, how they work. No, I don't want you to talk to developers, which makes no sense to me as a security person.
Yeah.
If I'm trying to help them solve a problem, I want them to know, I want to know how they work so I could help them work better.
So it's not necessarily a process, it's just like the curiosity and the communication patterns and the willingness to collaborate. Like, the
Yeah,
things that trip us up over and over again in software development.
right. It's all of that, but and you know what? It's also the mindset.
Mhm.
Traditionally, security people, we break things,
Yeah.
right? That one of the most common security roles is a penetration tester,
Yeah.
which basically is QA on steroids. Let's go and break stuff. It's not the same mindset as, well, how do I produce something that actually brings value to the organization, right? And
Yeah.
it's the working mode of developers. And right? You have to get into flow, you have to pick up the next bug, you have to pick up the next feature of the
Mhm.
user story, the conversation, the inclusive, stakeholder meetings. That's the type of thing that a lot of security teams are missing. A lot fewer than used to be, right? Nowadays, it is becoming more common to have a product security team or an
Mhm.
AppSec team that do understand developers and not org. But there are still organizations that are missing that, and they have that gap. And then what happens is that the developer organization and the security organization are very adversarial. And they're just going head to head and they're trying to push their features, and these are trying to keep them secure, and they're not actually talking.
I would love to know more about just kind of strategic approaches to security and how you're seeing that evolve. So like if we're talking about I think it's easy to get lost in the weeds in security. It's like, have we installed this scanner? If you're doing like big picture strategically, how should people be designing security in their organization?
That's a fantastic question. Thank you, Rachel, because this leads right into one of the drums that I always bang on. And there's always this question of, well, how secure is secure enough, right? You want to be secure enough, but you don't want to waste time on it. So you spend a certain amount of time building security, and
Mhm.
then 3 weeks later, you deploy the feature and you get hacked the next morning anyway. So
Yeah.
did we not spend enough on security? What happened here? And I think the issue is it's not just a question of how much effort to spend on security, it's where you
Mhm.
spend it. And this is where thinking strategically comes in.
Mhm.
And this is the thing that I spend a lot of my time doing, working with developer teams, teaching them about threat modeling, right? And threat modeling is basically, I introduce it as the way to think about what security means for your application. It helps you right size your effort, it helps you focus on what really matters to your application, to your business
Mhm.
from a security perspective. And this helps you build in the right features, the right security stuff, the right countermeasures. Don't spend a lot of time building security stuff that don't actually have any impact on the
Right.
product. It's the way to do secure design.
Yeah. So, and like, does OWASP have the threat modeling framework? Are there things that you like from OWASP that are resources there? What tools should people be looking for to do this well?
The best tool for threat modeling is literally a whiteboard, colored markers, and a bunch of brains in a room.
Okay, I like it.
Because the best way to do threat modeling, there's a lot of commercial tools out there I'm going to talk
Mhm.
about in a second, tools that can help you. But when you cut through everything else, the most important part of threat modeling is just getting in a room and talking about what does security mean for us. For those of you out there that might not be familiar with threat modeling, it's going mainstream, but not quite there yet. I'm just going to give a quick recap, if that's okay, of what
Yeah,
threat
that'd be
modeling
great.
is. And it's really comes down to answering 4 questions. And those 4 questions are really simply, what are we working on? Build a really good understanding of how the system works. The
Mhm.
interesting thing is that very often, even developers and architects don't always understand it the same way. I get
Mhm.
them in the room, it's not, oh, I totally didn't build it that way, or you were supposed
Mhm.
to do that, or why didn't anybody think of this? Get your architects, developers, product managers, DevOps, get them all in the same room to talk about how the system actually works, how the
Right.
feature is supposed to work on a whiteboard. And we draw like diagrams and helps people understand that. The second question is what can go wrong, right? Figure out the threats of how would an attacker break that? How would you abuse this interaction? How can this component be misused?
Mhm.
And there's a lot of different ways of doing that. I like using a model called STRIDE, spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, lab service elevation of privileges. I can go through that faster. I decided not to. And it's a different way of inspecting various aspects of each of those components and each of those interactions to see where those can break. And once you figure those out, then you could say, well, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? Let's build countermeasures against only against the threats that we decide actually have impact. And well,
Mhm.
the fourth question is, did we do a good job? Right? That's threat modeling, right? You can get a lot more complicated than that. A couple years ago, a bunch of really smart people invited me to join them, and we wrote up this threat modeling manifesto, which you could find at, surprisingly, threatmodelingmanifesto.org. Easy enough. And it's like a 7-minute read if you want to read it twice. It's easy enough, and it's just a high level of what threat modeling
Mhm.
should be. Irrelevant to what methodology you use, it's not a guide. For that, OWASP does have a bunch of great threat modeling guides.
Mhm.
There's a cheat sheet for it. There's a threat modeling project drawing up a guide to how to do threat modeling. And there's a great little tool called Threat Dragon, which is a diagramming tool that also helps generate threats
Okay.
internally to the diagram. So these are great tools to check out. There's a few other tools. There's one, PyTM, which is basically a Pythonic threat model as code. So you can
Okay,
write
cool.
up your diagrams, your threats as Python. And it's really useful to actually conceptualize your model. And the model is not a list of threats. That's part of
Mhm.
it. But it's how we think about security. To be able to stick that into code, which you can then, version together in your repo together with your application is really useful.
I love this. Well, this has been amazing. I'm so grateful that you took the time out to chat with me, and thank you for letting me misquote you all this time.
Yes. I love a good misquote.
Oh, wonderful. But Avi, this has been an absolute joy, and we'll have to do this again more because I have learned a lot and I would love to keep diving in more.
Gladly.